The elite marksmen at Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility had witnessed countless competitions over the years, but none of them were prepared for what happened when Victoria Ashford stepped onto their range that scorching Tuesday morning. In August, carrying what appeared to be her grandfather's hunting rifle, she would proceed to humiliate every single one of their million-dollar weapon systems with a shot so impossibly perfect that it would rewrite the facility's record books and force an entire generation of military snipers to question everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At first glance, Victoria looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn on her way to historical reenactment. Her silver-streaked auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that had probably been her go-to style for decades, and her weathered hands gripped an enormous rifle case that seemed to dwarf her petite 5 feet 4 inches frame. She wore simple khaki cargo pants, a faded navy blue polo shirt, and hiking boots that had clearly seen thousands of miles of rough terrain, looking more like a park ranger heading to work than someone about to compete against the most elite military sharpshooters in the country. What immediately caught everyone's attention wasn't just her civilian appearance in this temple of military precision. It was the way she moved through the facility with a quiet confidence that seemed completely at odds with how utterly out of place she appeared. While other competitors strutted around in tactical gear worth more than most people's annual salaries, comparing custom rifle systems and discussing the latest advances in ballistic technology with the intensity of Formula One engineers, Victoria simply found an empty bench at the far end of the 1,000-yard range and began unpacking her equipment with methodical, almost ritualistic precision. The weapon she revealed from that battered hard case drew stares and poorly concealed snickers from across the firing line. It was a Winchester Model 70 from what appeared to be the 1960s, a bolt-action rifle that might have been cutting-edge technology when Lyndon Johnson was president, but now looked like something that belonged in a hunting lodge rather than competing against the most advanced precision rifle systems on Earth. The wooden stock was scratched and worn smooth in places where countless hands had gripped it over the decades, and the metal showed the kind of honest patina that only came from years of faithful use in all kinds of weather conditions. Compared to the sleek, modern precision rifles surrounding it, weapons that incorporated space-age materials, computer-assisted optics, and engineering innovations that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible, Victoria's Winchester looked like a covered wagon parked next to a fleet of Formula One race cars. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves, a decorated Army Ranger with 4 combat deployments and a collection of shooting trophies that filled an entire wall of his apartment, was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. He nudged his shooting partner, Corporal Jake Morrison, and nodded toward Victoria's position with barely contained amusement. "What is that thing? A Civil War museum piece?" His voice carried across the range louder than he probably intended, drawing chuckles from the other elite marksmen. "My great-grandfather probably carried something like that in Vietnam." Victoria's expression didn't change as she continued her meticulous inspection of the rifle, running her fingers along the barrel and checking the bolt action with movements that spoke of deep familiarity built over countless hours of practice. She seemed completely oblivious to the attention she was drawing, focused entirely on her equipment with the kind of concentration that suggested this preparation ritual was as natural and necessary as breathing. Lieutenant Sarah Blackstone, one of only 4 female shooters in the competition and a Marine who had fought tooth and nail to earn respect in an overwhelmingly male-dominated field, felt a mixture of embarrassment and genuine concern watching the older woman. She'd battled skepticism and scrutiny at every stage of her career, proving herself repeatedly to colleagues who questioned whether women belonged in elite tactical roles. And seeing another woman show up looking so obviously unprepared made her cringe inwardly. "Someone should probably tell her this isn't a weekend hunting club," Blackstone whispered to her teammate. "This is serious competition. Careers are made and broken here." The buzz of conversation around the range grew noticeably louder as more shooters noticed Victoria and her antique rifle. Some pulled out smartphones to take pictures, already composing social media posts about the weekend warrior who'd somehow gotten authorization to compete, alongside active-duty special operations personnel. Others shook their heads in visible disgust, viewing her presence as disrespectful to the serious nature of their training and the sacrifices they'd made to earn their places in this elite competition. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh, the range master, overseeing the competition, approached Victoria's bench with a clipboard and a diplomatically neutral expression that barely concealed his skepticism and growing concern. At 48, Walsh had seen every type of shooter imaginable during his 26 years of military service, from cocky rookies who thought they knew everything to grizzled veterans whose skills had been forged in the crucible of actual combat. But he'd never encountered someone quite like this, someone who looked so fundamentally out of place in an environment where excellence was measured in fractions of inches, and split-second timing could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility represented the absolute pinnacle of modern military marksmanship training infrastructure. Spread across 47 acres of meticulously maintained Colorado mountain terrain, the complex featured electronic target systems capable of recording bullet impacts down to thousandths of an inch, climate-controlled shooting positions equipped with the latest stabilization technology, and observation towers fitted with high-powered optics that could analyze every aspect of a shooter's performance in real time with scientific precision. This wasn't a place where amateur enthusiasts came to play soldier on weekends. The facility hosted competitions that determined assignments to the most elite sniper schools in the world, selected candidates for classified special operations units whose very existence was denied by official sources, and validated the skills of marksmen whose accuracy could mean the difference between successful missions and international incidents that never made the evening news. The shooters who dominated this environment represented the absolute cream of military marksmanship, men and women who had dedicated their entire careers to the pursuit of precision shooting perfection. They carried rifle systems that cost more than luxury sports cars, equipped with optical systems developed by aerospace engineers, and loaded with ammunition manufactured to tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch. Their gear bags contained ballistic computers capable of calculating wind drift, atmospheric pressure, temperature variations, and even the Coriolis effect with scientific precision that would have impressed university physics professors. Yet, here was Victoria Ashford, looking like she'd wandered in from a rural gun club, preparing to compete against these titans of tactical marksmanship with equipment that appeared to predate the moon landing. The contrast was so stark, so fundamentally absurd, that several of the elite shooters found themselves questioning whether this was some kind of elaborate, practical joke or training exercise designed to test their ability to maintain focus despite unexpected distractions. As the morning sun climbed higher over the Colorado peaks, casting long shadows across the range and sending heat waves shimmering in the distance, Victoria continued her unhurried preparation routine, apparently oblivious to the storm of skepticism and barely contained mockery swirling around her position. She had no idea that within hours her ancient Winchester would deliver a lesson in humility that would transform the careers and attitudes of every person watching, proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are those who appear least threatening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weapon Victoria Ashford lifted from her weathered case drew the kind of stunned silence usually reserved for witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Her Winchester Model 70 looked like it had been transported directly From a 1960s hunting lodge, complete with scratches that told stories of decades in the field, and a wooden stock that had been worn smooth by thousands of hours of handling. The rifle's blued steel barrel showed honest wear patterns, and the bolt action moved with the kind of mechanical precision that only came from meticulous maintenance over many years. But it was the scope mounted on top that really sent waves of disbelief rippling through the assembled elite marksmen. Victoria's optic was a fixed 4X Redfield from what appeared to be the Nixon administration, a simple, straightforward piece of glass that looked like a museum exhibit when compared to the technological marvels surrounding it. While other competitors sported variable power scopes with digital displays, laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, and night vision capabilities that could calculate shooting solutions faster than most people could perform basic math, Victoria's scope looked like something a farm boy might have saved up to buy for deer hunting. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves lowered his binoculars with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something that defied rational explanation. His custom-built precision rifle system, which had cost him 3 years of savings and represented the absolute cutting edge of civilian and military technology, suddenly felt almost embarrassed sitting next to Victoria's antique. The contrast was so stark it was almost comical, like parking a horse-drawn carriage next to a Tesla. "Sweet mother of pearl," Reeves muttered to Corporal Morrison, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been pity. "That scope probably has less magnification than my backup binoculars. How is she planning to even see the targets at long range, much less hit them?" Morrison shook his head slowly, studying Victoria's setup through his own high-powered spotting scope. The retired Marine Corps sniper instructor had seen a lot of questionable equipment choices during his career, but this transcended mere poor judgment and entered the realm of the surreal. "That rifle might have been state-of-the-art when my grandfather was learning to shoot," he said, his tone suggesting he was witnessing some kind of tragic mistake. "But we're talking about precision shooting at distances where every technological advantage matters. That thing belongs in a display case, not on a competitive firing line." Lieutenant Sarah Blackstone found herself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions as she watched Victoria methodically check her rifle's action and adjust the simple sling with practiced movements. Part of her felt genuine concern for another woman who was about to humiliate herself in front of the military's most elite marksmen, while another part wondered if Victoria's presence might somehow reflect poorly on all female shooters in a field where they were already fighting an uphill battle for acceptance and respect. The ammunition Victoria began loading into her rifle only deepened the sense of anachronistic impossibility surrounding her entire setup. While other competitors loaded precision-manufactured cartridges that cost more per round than most people spent on lunch, bullets engineered to maintain supersonic velocity at ranges exceeding a mile, with ballistic coefficients calculated by computer modeling and powder charges measured to individual granules, Victoria's cartridges looked like they'd been hand-loaded in someone's garage workshop decades ago. The brass cases showed the telltale signs of multiple reloadings, with slight variations in neck tension and overall length that would have made precision shooting enthusiasts wince in sympathetic pain. The bullets themselves appeared to be simple lead core designs rather than the sophisticated match-grade projectiles that filled the ammunition bags of her competitors, projectiles designed by ballistics engineers using wind tunnel testing and computer modeling to achieve performance levels that pushed the very boundaries of physics. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh approached Victoria's position with the bearing of a man trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit any pattern in his extensive experience. His clipboard contained documentation for rifle systems worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, optics that incorporated technology developed for space telescopes, and ammunition that represented the pinnacle of manufacturing precision. Victoria's equipment looked like it had been assembled from a sporting goods store's clearance bin sometime during the Carter administration. "Ma'am," Walsh said carefully, his professional tone barely concealing his growing bewilderment, "I need to verify that your equipment meets the minimum specifications for this competition. We have safety requirements and performance standards that ensure fair competition among participants." He gestured subtly toward the high-tech weaponry surrounding them. "This is a precision shooting competition where accuracy is measured in fractions of inches at extreme distances." Victoria looked up from her rifle with calm brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience Walsh couldn't quite categorize. "I understand the requirements, Master Sergeant," she replied quietly, her voice carrying a subtle confidence that seemed incongruous with her outdated equipment. "This rifle has been meeting precision standards for longer than most of these modern systems have existed." The implications of her statement hung in the air like a challenge nobody quite knew how to interpret. Several nearby shooters exchanged glances that mixed amusement with growing curiosity about Victoria's background and the source of her apparent confidence in equipment that logic suggested should be completely inadequate for elite-level competition. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, a Green Beret, whose custom rifle represented 18 months of research and $25,000 in cutting-edge components, couldn't resist joining the conversation. "Ma'am, with all due respect, precision shooting has evolved significantly since that rifle was manufactured," he said, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to a confused civilian. "The ballistic computers alone that we're using provide advantages that manual calculation simply can't match. You're essentially bringing a slide rule to a supercomputer competition." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering his assessment. "Modern technology certainly provides capabilities that weren't available when this rifle was built," she acknowledged, running her hand along the worn wooden stock with obvious affection. "Though I've found that understanding the fundamentals often matters more than having the latest equipment." Her response only seemed to confirm the growing consensus among the elite marksmen that Victoria was a well-meaning amateur who had somehow gained access to a competition far beyond her capabilities. The idea that fundamental shooting skills could compensate for such obvious technological disadvantages struck most of them as quaintly naive, the kind of romantic notion that ignored the scientific realities of modern precision shooting. As Victoria continued her methodical preparation, loading her ancient rifle with hand-loaded ammunition and consulting what appeared to be a hand-drawn ballistic chart that looked like something a meteorology student might have sketched for homework, the contrast between her approach and the high-tech methodologies surrounding her became even more pronounced. While other competitors used laser rangefinders, electronic wind meters, and ballistic calculators to develop their shooting solutions, Victoria seemed to be relying on methods that predated the digital age entirely. The morning sun continued climbing over the Colorado peaks, and the technological gap between Victoria's equipment and her competitors' arsenals became the unofficial entertainment for marksmen who were beginning to view her presence as an amusing sideshow to the serious business of elite military competition. None of them had any idea that they were about to witness a demonstration that would challenge everything they thought they understood about the relationship between technology and true marksmanship skill. The morning heat was beginning to build across Fort Thunderridge's pristine range complex when the first wave of open mockery began to ripple through the assembled elite marksmen. What had started as surprised murmurs and poorly concealed snickers was evolving into something more pointed and deliberate as the reality of Victoria's equipment became impossible to ignore. Captain Mitchell Steele, a Navy SEAL whose reputation for precision shooting had earned him legendary status within special operations circles, stood beside his $45,000 custom rifle system and shook his head with the kind of bemused disbelief usually reserved for witnessing something genuinely absurd. His weapon represented 3 years of collaboration with master gunsmiths, ballistics engineers, and optical specialists who had pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible in a portable precision platform. "This has got to be some kind of joke," Steele announced loudly enough for half the range to hear, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone who had never encountered a shooting challenge he couldn't master. Someone's great-grandmother wandered onto a military installation with her late husband's deer rifle and somehow convinced security she belongs in a tactical shooting competition. His comment drew appreciative laughter from nearby competitors, who were beginning to view Victoria's presence as an increasingly amusing distraction from their serious preparations. The cognitive dissonance between the facility's high-tech environment and Victoria's anachronistic equipment was becoming a source of entertainment that helped break the tension of pre-competition nerves. Sergeant Major Frank Dangzello, whose collection of shooting trophies filled an entire trophy case at Fort Bragg, and whose expertise had been featured in multiple military training publications, approached Victoria's bench with the bearing of someone about to deliver helpful guidance to a confused civilian. At 52, Dangzello possessed the kind of tactical wisdom that came from 2 decades of competitive shooting at the highest levels, including 3 consecutive victories at the International Sniper Competition and training programs that had taken him to every continent except Antarctica. "Ma'am," Dangzello said with carefully measured politeness, "I couldn't help but notice your equipment choices, and I'm wondering if you might have misunderstood the nature of this competition." He gestured toward the electronic target system stretching across the range, their digital displays capable of measuring shot placement to microscopic precision. "We're talking about precision shooting at distances where atmospheric conditions, temperature variations, and even the Earth's rotation become significant factors in bullet trajectory." Victoria looked up from her rifle, where she was making minute adjustments to her scope with tools that appeared to have been crafted by a blacksmith sometime during the Kennedy administration. Her expression remained calm and attentive, showing no signs of defensiveness despite the growing chorus of skepticism surrounding her position. "I appreciate your concern, Sergeant Major," she replied quietly, her voice carrying a subtle undertone that several nearby shooters couldn't quite identify. "This competition does indeed require significant precision. I've been following the qualification standards and course requirements quite carefully." D'Angelo's eyebrows rose slightly at her response, which seemed to indicate either remarkable confidence or profound ignorance about the challenges she was about to face. "With respect, ma'am, those standards assume competitors are using equipment capable of meeting them. That rifle you're carrying might have been adequate for hunting applications when it was manufactured, but modern tactical shooting requires capabilities that simply didn't exist in previous generations." Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves, emboldened by D'Angelo's intervention, decided to make his own assessment more explicit. "Ma'am, I don't want to be disrespectful, but what you're attempting here is like trying to compete in Formula One racing with a Model T Ford," he said, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining obvious facts to a confused amateur. "The physics simply don't support what you're trying to accomplish." Corporal Jake Morrison nodded his agreement while adjusting his own rifle's computer-controlled environmental monitoring system. "That scope you're using probably can't resolve targets clearly beyond 300 yards, much less provide the precision required for shots at 800 or 1,000 yards, he added. "And without ballistic compensation, atmospheric modeling, or even basic wind drift calculation capabilities, you're essentially shooting blind at extended ranges." The technical critique was beginning to draw a crowd of interested observers as more competitors gathered around Victoria's position to witness what was shaping into either an educational moment or a spectacular demonstration of civilian overconfidence. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan, whose military career included classified assignments that had taken him to the world's most challenging shooting environments, approached with the expression of someone observing a fascinating but concerning phenomenon. "The concern here," Brennan said, his voice carrying the weight of command authority, "is that precision shooting at this level requires not just skill, but equipment capable of performing at tolerances that push the boundaries of mechanical possibility. The margin for error becomes essentially zero, and equipment limitations can override even exceptional fundamental techniques." Victoria's response surprised several of the assembled marksmen with its apparent technical understanding. "You're absolutely right about the precision requirements, Colonel," she said thoughtfully. "Atmospheric conditions, temperature gradients, and wind patterns do become critical factors at extended ranges. Equipment certainly plays an important role in managing those variables." Her acknowledgement seemed to encourage Brennan to continue his explanation. "Exactly. Which is why everyone here is using systems that can compensate for those variables in real time. Ballistic computers that can calculate trajectory solutions faster and more accurately than any human. Optical systems that can resolve target details, invisible to the naked eye, and ammunition loaded to specifications that eliminate as many variables as possible." Captain Alexandra Torres, one of the Air Force's premier precision rifle instructors whose expertise had been sought by NATO allies for advanced marksmanship training programs, joined the growing discussion circle around Victoria's bench. "The technological advancement in precision shooting over the past 2 decades has been exponential," she explained, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed that evolution firsthand. "What we're capable of achieving today would have seemed impossible to shooters using equipment like yours." Victoria nodded with apparent interest, as if genuinely curious about their perspectives rather than defensive about her choices. "Technology has certainly opened up capabilities that weren't available to previous generations," she agreed. "The precision manufacturing, advanced materials, and computational power available today represent remarkable achievements." Her calm acceptance of their technical superiority seemed to embolden Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, whose reputation for identifying equipment deficiencies had made him a sought-after consultant for military procurement programs. "The fundamental issue," Mendoza explained, warming to his theme, "is that competitive shooting at this level has evolved beyond what manual methods can support. It's not just about better equipment. It's about capabilities that are mathematically required for consistent performance." Chief Petty Officer Rachel Whitney, whose naval special warfare background included training programs that pushed precision shooting to its absolute limits, added her own assessment to the growing technical discussion. "The environmental monitoring alone requires instrumentation that can measure atmospheric conditions in real time and calculate their impact on ballistic performance. Without that data, you're essentially guessing at solutions that require scientific precision." Victoria's rifle, sitting quietly on its simple bipod while surrounded by millions of dollars worth of advanced weaponry, was beginning to look less like serious competition equipment and more like a museum piece that had somehow wandered into the wrong century. The contrast between her methodical, old-school preparation routine and the high-tech analytical processes surrounding her was becoming more pronounced with each passing minute. Several smartphones had emerged as competitors began documenting what they anticipated would become either a cautionary tale about overconfidence or an amusing anecdote to share with colleagues who hadn't witnessed the spectacle firsthand. The general consensus among the elite marksmen was crystallizing around the belief that Victoria represented a well-meaning amateur who had somehow gained access to a competition far beyond her capabilities and equipment limitations. The technical discussion continued to build momentum as more experts weighed in with increasingly detailed explanations of why Victoria's approach was fundamentally flawed. None of them had any suspicion that they were about to receive an education in the difference between technological dependence and genuine mastery, or that Victoria's ancient Winchester was about to deliver a lesson that would humble every advanced system on the range. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh found himself facing an administrative nightmare that defied every protocol in his extensive experience. Managing elite military competitions. Victoria's authorization paperwork appeared legitimate on its surface, complete with official seals, proper formatting, and authorization codes that checked out when run through standard verification systems. However, the deeper he dug into the documentation, the more questions arose about how someone with such obviously inadequate equipment had gained access to one of the military's most exclusive training events. The authorization forms bore signatures from command levels that Walsh rarely encountered in routine training operations. General Patricia Hawkins' signature appeared on several documents, referencing special programs and qualification standards that weren't part of normal military marksmanship documentation. When Walsh attempted to verify these authorizations through standard channels, he found himself transferred between offices whose personnel seemed surprised by his inquiries and reluctant to provide clear answers about Victoria's background or qualifications. "Sir, this is Master Sergeant Walsh at Fort Thunderridge," he said into his secure communication device, speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Susan Martinez at Army Personnel Command. "I'm calling to verify authorization for a civilian competitor named Victoria Ashford. Her paperwork references programs and qualification codes that aren't in our standard database." Martinez's response carried a tone that immediately caught Walsh's attention. "Master Sergeant, those authorizations come from levels that require special handling. I'm going to need to transfer you to a different office for verification of that particular participant's credentials." The transfer led Walsh through a maze of departments and clearance levels he'd never encountered during 26 years of military service. Each office seemed to know something about Victoria's authorization, but none could provide complete information about her background or the source of her access to the competition. The fragmented responses suggested involvement from agencies and programs that operated well beyond the scope of routine military training exercises. Colonel Rebecca Harrison, Fort Thunderridge's commanding officer, received an encrypted communication during the morning preparation period that transformed her understanding of the situation unfolding on her range. The message came through channels she recognized as belonging to organizations that didn't officially exist, referencing operations and achievements that were classified at levels requiring special compartmented information clearances. Harrison's subsequent conversation with Walsh carried an urgency that made the seasoned rangemaster pay careful attention to every word. "Master Sergeant, I need you to ensure that Ms. Ashford receives every courtesy and accommodation during her visit to our facility," Harrison said, her tone suggesting this was not a request, but a directive from significantly higher authority. "Her background and qualifications warrant special consideration that may not be immediately apparent from standard documentation." The implications of Harrison's instructions sent ripples of confusion through the range staff who had been witnessing the morning's technical discussions about Victoria's equipment limitations. Walsh found himself caught between his professional assessment of Victoria's obvious inadequacies and direct orders from his commanding officer to treat her with special deference that seemed completely unjustified by anything he could observe. When Walsh returned to the firing line, his demeanor toward Victoria had undergone a subtle but noticeable transformation. The skeptical concern that had characterized his earlier interactions was replaced by something approaching professional respect, despite the fact that nothing about Victoria's appearance or equipment had changed. The shift was observed by several elite marksmen who understood that their senior non-commissioned officer wouldn't modify his behavior without authorization from levels of command that didn't typically involve themselves in routine training operations. "Ma'am," Walsh said formally, approaching Victoria's position with a clipboard containing additional documentation that hadn't been present during their earlier interaction. "I've received clarification regarding your participation in today's competition. Please let me know if you require any special accommodations or support during your time at our facility." Victoria's response to Walsh's changed attitude was characteristically understated. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I appreciate your professionalism. The facilities here are excellent, and your staff has been very accommodating." Her tone suggested someone accustomed to such shifts in recognition rather than surprised by the validation. Captain Mitchell Steele, who had been observing this exchange while conducting final preparations on his own weapon system, found himself increasingly puzzled by the apparent contradiction between Victoria's obvious equipment deficiencies and the growing signs of official support for her participation. The Navy SEAL's extensive experience with classified operations had taught him to recognize when situations involved elements that weren't immediately visible to standard observation. "Master Sergeant," Steele said quietly, approaching Walsh during a brief break in range activities, "I'm noticing some unusual aspects to the situation. Is there background information about this competitor that might be relevant to understanding her presence here?" Walsh's response was carefully measured, suggesting someone navigating between conflicting requirements for discretion and transparency. "Captain, all participants in this competition have been properly authorized through appropriate channels. Ms. Ashford's qualifications have been verified by competent authority, though the specific details of her background may not be readily accessible through standard documentation systems." The cryptic nature of Walsh's response only deepened Steele's curiosity about Victoria's true identity and the source of her apparently high-level authorization. His experience with special operations had familiarized him with the bureaucratic patterns that surrounded personnel whose backgrounds involved classified programs or sensitive assignments that couldn't be acknowledged through normal channels. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan's own inquiries through Air Force intelligence networks yielded similarly fragmentary responses that suggested Victoria's background involved organizations and operations that existed in the shadowy regions between official military structure and classified activities that governments preferred not to acknowledge. The piecemeal information he received painted a picture of someone whose qualifications transcended normal military hierarchies and achievement categories. There are references to training programs and operational assignments that don't appear in standard military databases, Brennan confided to Captain Alexandra Torres during a private conversation away from the main group of competitors. Whatever this woman's background, it involves levels of classification that require special handling by personnel who don't typically manage routine training events. Torres nodded thoughtfully, her own experience with NATO special operations having exposed her to the complex web of organizations and programs that operated beyond public acknowledgement. That would explain the disconnect between her apparent amateur status and the official support she's receiving, she observed. Someone with serious authority has intervened to ensure her participation in this competition. The growing awareness among the elite marksmen that Victoria represented something more complex than a misguided civilian was beginning to create an undercurrent of uncertainty that challenged their initial assessments. While her equipment remained obviously inadequate by any technical standard, the official support for her participation suggested backgrounds and qualifications that weren't immediately apparent to standard observation methods. Sergeant Major Frank DeAngelo's attempts to research Victoria's shooting background through competitive shooting organizations and military marksmanship databases yielded no results whatsoever. It was as if Victoria Ashford had never existed in any official capacity related to precision shooting, despite her apparent confidence and the high-level authorization that had granted her access to the competition. Either she's the most overconfident amateur in shooting sports history, D'Angelo observed to his colleague Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, or there's something about her background that's being deliberately obscured for reasons we're not clear to understand. The mysterious aspects of Victoria's authorization were creating a cognitive dissonance among competitors who found themselves caught between their direct observations of her equipment limitations and growing evidence that she possessed qualifications significant enough to warrant intervention from command levels. that didn't typically concern themselves with individual training participants. The stage was being set for revelations that would challenge everything they thought they understood about the woman quietly preparing her ancient rifle for what appeared to be inevitable humiliation. The first official practice session began at precisely 0800 hours, with shooters taking positions at the 600-yard line under Master Sergeant Walsh's careful supervision. Victoria settled into position 17, sandwiched between Captain Alexandra Torres, whose $38,000 rifle system incorporated artificial intelligence-assisted targeting, and Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves, whose custom-built platform represented 3 years of meticulous research and development with master gunsmiths across the country. Victoria's preparation routine immediately drew attention for all the wrong reasons. While other competitors spent 15 to 20 minutes methodically adjusting their advanced bipod systems, configuring their electronic environmental monitoring equipment, and fine-tuning their ballistic computers with real-time atmospheric data, Victoria simply opened her worn leather shooting bag and pulled out a small spiral notebook that looked like it had survived multiple decades of field use. The contrast was painfully obvious to everyone observing. Torres was calibrating her rifle's integrated wind meter and temperature sensors, devices that cost more than most people's monthly salary and could measure atmospheric conditions with laboratory precision. Reeves was running final calculations on his ballistic computer, a device that incorporated GPS location data, atmospheric pressure readings, and even magnetic declination adjustments to provide shooting solutions accurate to fractions of an inch at extreme distances. Victoria, meanwhile, consulted what appeared to be hand-drawn charts covered in plastic sleeves, making quick notations with a pencil stub that looked like it had been sharpened with a pocket knife. Her calculations seemed to involve methods that predated electronic computation entirely, relying on formulas and reference tables that belonged in a museum of military history rather than a cutting-edge tactical competition. "Sweet Jesus," muttered Corporal Jake Morrison from position 14, loud enough for several nearby shooters to hear. "Is she seriously planning to compete against computer-assisted targeting systems, using what looks like homework from a high school physics class?" The ammunition Victoria loaded into her Winchester's magazine drew additional commentary from competitors who understood the critical importance of precision cartridges in elite-level shooting, while others fed their rifles with match-grade ammunition that cost upward of $15 per round, bullets manufactured to tolerances, measured in thousandths of an inch, and loaded with powder charges. Weighed to individual granules, Victoria's cartridges looked like they'd been assembled in someone's basement workshop using components salvaged from a sporting goods store's discount bin. Chief Petty Officer Rachel Whitney, observing through her high-powered spotting scope, shook her head in disbelief as she watched Victoria's loading procedure. "Those cartridges show clear signs of multiple reloadings," she told her shooting partner. "The case dimensions are inconsistent, the bullet seating depths vary noticeably, and I bet money the powder charges haven't been weighed to competition standards. She's introducing variables that could affect accuracy by several inches at long range." When the command to commence firing echoed across the range, Victoria's performance provided immediate confirmation of every skeptical prediction that had been voiced throughout the morning. Her first shot required nearly 50 seconds from the time she chambered the cartridge until she squeezed the trigger, an eternity compared to the rapid engagement sequences demonstrated by competitors whose training emphasized speed and precision. Under time pressure, the bolt-action mechanism of Victoria's Winchester forced her to break position after each shot to cycle the action manually, while competitors with semi-automatic precision rifles maintained their sight pictures and fired follow-up shots with mechanical consistency that spoke to thousands of hours of advanced training. Captain Mitchell Steele completed his 5-shot string in under 2 minutes, his rifle tracking smoothly between targets with the kind of mechanical precision that expensive stabilization systems could provide. Victoria's shooting pace By contrast, suggested someone who had learned marksmanship during an era when ammunition was precious and every shot required careful consideration. She spent what seemed like minutes between each shot, consulting her handwritten notes, observing wind conditions through methods that appeared to involve watching grass movement and feeling air currents on her face, and making calculations that defied every principle of modern tactical shooting doctrine. The electronic scoring system's real-time feedback provided brutal confirmation of what visual observation had suggested. Victoria's first string of 5 shots scattered across the target face in what looked like random placement, with accuracy numbers that would have been considered disappointing for recreational shooters, much less someone competing against the military's elite marksmen. Her overall score placed her 31st out of 32 competitors, ahead only of a young Marine lieutenant who was experiencing equipment malfunctions with his rifle's computerized targeting system. The gap between Victoria's performance and the leaders was so significant that several range officials checked their scoring equipment to ensure the numbers were being recorded correctly. "This is painful to watch," Lieutenant Sarah Blackstone confided to Sergeant Major Frank D'Angelo during the mid-morning break. "I understand that someone higher up authorized her participation, but she's clearly in over her head. The kindest thing we could do would be to suggest she withdraw before the afternoon sessions when the distances increase and her equipment limitations become even more pronounced." D'Angelo nodded his agreement while studying the preliminary scoring sheets that showed Victoria's performance lagging behind even the qualifying standards for basic military marksmanship programs. "Her time between shots alone is violating range protocols," he observed. "At this pace, she'll still be shooting when everyone else has finished and gone home for dinner." The technical aspects of Victoria's poor performance were becoming topics of detailed analysis among competitors who possessed the expertise to identify specific deficiencies in her approach. Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, whose background included training civilian contractors in precision shooting techniques, cataloged a comprehensive list of fundamental errors that explained Victoria's dismal accuracy. "Her breathing pattern is inconsistent. Her trigger control shows obvious jerking that's affecting shot placement, and her follow-through is non-existent," Mendoza explained to a group of interested observers. "Combined with equipment that can't provide the precision required for competitive shooting, she's essentially guaranteed to fail at every level of this competition." Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, whose Green Beret background included extensive experience evaluating shooting performance under stress, added his own technical assessment to the growing consensus about Victoria's inadequacies. "The fundamental issue is that she's trying to use techniques developed for hunting applications in a tactical environment that requires capabilities she simply doesn't possess. It's like trying to perform brain surgery with tools designed for carpentry work." The afternoon sessions promised even greater challenges as distances increased to 800 and 1,000 yards, ranges where atmospheric conditions, wind patterns, and equipment limitations would magnify every deficiency in Victoria's approach. The consensus among elite competitors was that Victoria's morning performance, disappointing as it had been, would look impressive compared to what awaited her when precision requirements increased exponentially. Captain Torres, whose extensive experience with international competitive shooting provided perspective on performance standards across multiple disciplines, offered what seemed like the most charitable assessment possible. At longer distances, the mathematical requirements for precision shooting become absolute, she explained to colleagues gathered around the scoring station. Equipment limitations that create minor accuracy problems at 600 yards become insurmountable obstacles at 1,000 yards. Unless she's hiding some remarkable capabilities we haven't seen yet, the afternoon sessions are going to be catastrophic. The growing crowd of observers included several off-duty personnel who had heard about the civilian competitor with the antique rifle and wanted to witness what was shaping up to be either a spectacular failure or an amusing demonstration of overconfidence. Meeting reality. Victoria's reputation was spreading throughout Fort Thunderridge as the woman who had somehow gained access to elite military training despite possessing equipment and skills that belonged in a different century entirely. None of the elite marksmen surrounding Victoria had any suspicion that they were witnessing a carefully calculated performance designed to conceal capabilities that would soon transform their understanding of precision shooting, equipment limitations, and the relationship between technological advancement and true marksmanship mastery. Victoria's ancient Winchester was about to deliver an education that would humble every advanced system on the range. The lunch break at Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility buzzed with conversations that increasingly centered on Victoria's disastrous morning performance and the growing consensus that her continued participation was becoming an embarrassment to the entire competition. Elite marksmen, who had initially viewed her presence with amused tolerance, were now expressing frustration and genuine concern about the impact her poor showing might have on the facility's reputation and the serious nature of their training. Objectives. Captain Mitchell Steele, whose patience had been steadily eroding throughout the morning sessions, finally decided to address the situation directly. His Navy SEAL background had instilled in him a respect for efficiency and professional excellence that made Victoria's continued struggles feel like a personal affront to the standards he'd spent years upholding. During the break period, he approached Victoria's shooting position with the bearing of someone about to deliver necessary but unpleasant guidance to a situation that had spiraled beyond acceptable limits. "Ma'am," Steele said, his tone carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected mission success and personnel safety, "I've been observing your performance throughout the morning, and I believe we need to have a frank discussion about the reality of your situation here." Victoria looked up from her rifle, where she was making what appeared to be minor adjustments to her scope with tools that belonged in an antique shop rather than a precision shooting competition. Her expression remained calm and attentive, showing none of the defensiveness or embarrassment that might have been expected from someone whose performance had been so thoroughly inadequate. "I'm listening, Captain," she replied quietly, her voice carrying the same understated confidence that had puzzled observers throughout the morning despite her obviously poor results. Steele gestured toward the scoring sheets that documented Victoria's morning performance in numbers that told an unambiguous story of failure. "Your current standing places you dead last among all competitors, with accuracy numbers that fall below the minimum standards we'd expect from basic military qualification courses. The afternoon sessions are going to involve distances where your equipment limitations and technique deficiencies will become even more pronounced." Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan, who had been conducting his own assessment of the situation from a tactical leadership perspective, joined the conversation with the demeanor of someone offering strategic guidance to resolve a problem that was affecting overall mission effectiveness. "The concern from an operational standpoint," Brennan added, "is that precision shooting at extended ranges requires capabilities that transcend individual skill and enter the realm of scientific calculation and technological support." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering their professional assessments rather than dismissing them out of hand. "You're both absolutely right about the precision requirements at extended distances," she acknowledged. "Atmospheric conditions, ballistic trajectory calculations, and equipment performance all become critical factors when accuracy is measured in fractions of inches rather than general target hits." Her technical understanding of the challenges only made her continued participation seem more puzzling to the assembled elite marksmen. If Victoria possessed sufficient knowledge to articulate the requirements for precision shooting, why did her performance suggest such fundamental incompetence in executing those same requirements? Sergeant Major Frank Denzillo, whose extensive experience managing competitive shooting events had given him insight into the psychological factors that could destroy a competitor's confidence and performance. Approached the situation from what he considered a more diplomatic angle. "Ma'am, there's no shame in recognizing when you're facing challenges that exceed your current capabilities," he said, his tone suggesting someone offering face-saving alternatives to continued embarrassment. Military precision shooting has evolved into a highly specialized discipline that requires years of dedicated training and equipment, investments that most civilian shooters simply can't match. Perhaps there's a more appropriate venue where your shooting interests could be pursued, without the pressure of competing against personnel whose entire careers have been dedicated to this specific skill set. Victoria's response carried a subtle undertone that several nearby listeners couldn't quite identify, though it suggested depths of experience that seemed incongruous with her morning's performance. "I appreciate your concern about the competitive pressure, Sergeant Major. Competition can certainly reveal the gaps between training methods and actual capability under stress." Captain Alexandra Torres, whose frustration had been building throughout the morning as she watched Victoria's poor performance reflect poorly on female competitors in general, decided to make her position more explicit. "The issue isn't just about individual performance," Torres said, her voice carrying the intensity of someone who had fought for respect in a male-dominated field and now felt that respect being undermined by association. "When someone participates in elite-level competition without possessing the qualifications or equipment necessary to perform competently, it reflects on the selection process and the standards that define access to these training opportunities. Other personnel who were denied access to make room for participants might question whether those decisions were made based on merit and capability." The criticism was becoming more pointed and personal, moving beyond technical assessments of equipment limitations into questions about Victoria's right to be present at the facility at all. Several other competitors had gathered around the conversation, their expressions suggesting agreement with the increasingly direct challenges to Victoria's continued participation. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves, emboldened by the support of senior personnel, decided to voice what many others were thinking but hadn't yet articulated directly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this competition represents career opportunities and training access that most military personnel spend years working to earn," he said, his tone carrying frustration that had been building throughout the morning's sessions. Watching someone struggle with basic fundamentals while using equipment that belongs in a museum makes it difficult to take the entire process seriously. "Maybe it would be better for everyone involved if you considered withdrawing before the afternoon sessions where the performance gaps are going to become even more obvious." The suggestion that Victoria voluntarily remove herself from the competition hung in the air like a challenge that demanded some kind of response. The growing circle of elite marksmen waited to see whether she would accept their collective assessment of her inadequacy or continue to insist on participating in a competition that was clearly beyond her capabilities. Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, whose tactical training background had taught him to identify and address performance issues before they affected mission success, added his voice to the growing chorus of concern. "The fundamental problem is that precision shooting at the distances we'll be engaging this afternoon requires equipment and techniques that simply weren't available when that rifle was manufactured," he explained, his tone suggesting someone delivering a final technical assessment that should resolve any remaining doubts. "Modern ballistic science has evolved beyond what manual calculation methods can support. Without computer-assisted trajectory solutions, environmental monitoring systems, and precision ammunition loaded to competition specifications, you're essentially trying to achieve mathematical precision using tools designed for approximate results." Victoria's response to the escalating criticism and increasingly direct suggestions that she withdraw from the competition would determine whether the afternoon sessions proceeded with the full roster of competitors or whether common sense would prevail and eliminate a participant whose presence was becoming an embarrassment to the facility's reputation and the serious nature of elite military training. The tension surrounding Victoria's position had reached a breaking point where diplomatic suggestions were giving way to direct confrontation, and her next words would either diffuse the situation through graceful withdrawal or set the stage for an afternoon demonstration that none of the elite marksmen surrounding her could possibly anticipate. The ancient Winchester rifle sitting quietly on its simple bipod seemed almost to be waiting for its moment to speak with a voice that would silence every critic and skeptic. Within range of its message, Victoria rose slowly from her cross-legged position beside her shooting bench, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the mounting pressure from the circle of elite marksmen who had gathered to witness what they expected would be her inevitable capitulation to superior expertise and overwhelming logic. She looked around at the faces surrounding her seasoned warrior. Steele gestured toward the scoring sheets that documented Victoria's morning performance in numbers that told an unambiguous story of failure. Your current standing places you dead last among all competitors, with accuracy numbers that fall below the minimum standards we'd expect from basic military qualification courses. The afternoon sessions are going to involve distances where your equipment limitations and technique deficiencies will become even more pronounced. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan, who had been conducting his own assessment of the situation from a tactical leadership perspective, joined the conversation with the demeanor of someone offering strategic guidance to resolve a problem that was affecting overall mission effectiveness. The concern from an operational standpoint, Brennan added, is that precision shooting at extended ranges requires capabilities that transcend individual skill and enter the realm of scientific calculation and technological support. Victoria nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering their professional assessments rather than dismissing them out of hand. You're both absolutely right about the precision requirements at extended distances, she acknowledged. Atmospheric conditions, ballistic trajectory calculations, and equipment performance all become critical factors when accuracy is measured in fractions of inches rather than general target hits. Her technical understanding of the challenges only made her continued participation seem more puzzling to the assembled elite marksmen. If Victoria possessed sufficient knowledge to articulate what exactly did you have in mind? Brennan asked, his tone suggesting curiosity about how someone in Victoria's position could possibly propose a solution that would address the overwhelming evidence of her incompetence. Victoria's expression remained calm and pleasant, but something in her eyes suggested depths that none of the elite marksmen had noticed during their morning assessments. Well, since you're all so confident in your evaluations of my capabilities and equipment limitations, perhaps we could resolve this with a simple demonstration rather than continued theoretical discussion. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves straightened up, his competitive instincts immediately engaged by what sounded like a direct challenge to his technical expertise and shooting superiority. You're proposing some kind of head-to-head competition after the performance we witnessed this morning? Something along those lines, Victoria replied, her voice maintaining the same conversational tone she'd used throughout the day, despite the dramatic shift in dynamics occurring around her position. Though I was thinking more in terms of one shot each at the 1,000-yard target winner takes all, so to speak. The audacity of Victoria's proposal sent ripples of disbelief through the gathered crowd of elite marksmen. The 1,000-yard target represented the ultimate test of precision shooting capability, where atmospheric conditions, equipment performance, and shooter skill converged in challenges that pushed even the most advanced systems to their absolute limits. For someone whose morning performance had been catastrophically poor, to suggest such a test seemed beyond mere overconfidence and into the realm of delusion. Sergeant Major Frank Dinzello exchanged glances with Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, both men trying to process the cognitive dissonance between Victoria's obvious inadequacies and her apparent willingness to stake her reputation on a single shot at the competition's most demanding distance. The mathematics alone seemed to make her proposal a guaranteed formula for spectacular failure. "Ma'am," Dengallo said slowly, "the 1,000-yard target represents precision, requirements that challenge even our most advanced equipment and experienced shooters. Given your morning performance and the equipment limitations we've discussed, are you certain you want to set yourself up for that level of public demonstration?" Victoria nodded thoughtfully, as if she'd carefully considered the risks and decided. They were acceptable. "I understand the precision requirements involved, Sergeant Major. A single shot at 1,000 yards eliminates luck, equipment malfunctions, and environmental variables that might influence multiple shot groups. It's probably the most honest test of actual capability we could devise." Captain Alexandra Torres found herself caught between professional skepticism and growing curiosity about Victoria's apparently unshakable confidence in equipment that logic suggested should be completely inadequate for such challenges. "The parameters would need to be clearly defined," Torres said, her tactical training instincts taking over despite her conviction that Victoria was setting herself up for humiliation. "Single shot each, closest to center wins, witnessed by range officials with electronic scoring to eliminate any subjective evaluation," Victoria agreed readily. "Standard competition rules, maximum precision requirements, no equipment allowances or handicaps for older systems." Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh, who had been observing this exchange with growing concern about his responsibility for range safety and proper competitive protocols, found himself in the impossible position of either authorizing what appeared to be a guaranteed disaster or attempting to prevent a contest that participants were clearly determined to pursue. "This would be completely unofficial," Walsh announced, his tone suggesting someone trying to establish legal protection for what promised to be either an impressive demonstration or a spectacular failure. "Single shot each, 1,000-yard precision. Target, standard scoring procedures, witnessed by qualified range personnel." The crowd of elite marksmen that had gathered around Victoria's position was rapidly expanding as word spread throughout the facility about the impromptu challenge. Off-duty personnel, training staff, and even some administrative officers emerged from air-conditioned buildings to witness what promised to be either an educational moment about the importance of proper equipment or an amusing demonstration of civilian overconfidence meeting military reality. Captain Steele stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a shooting challenge he couldn't master. His custom rifle system represented the absolute pinnacle of precision shooting technology, incorporating innovations that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible in a portable weapons platform. The idea that Victoria's museum piece could challenge his equipment seemed not just unlikely, but almost insulting to the scientific principles that governed modern ballistic performance. "I'll represent the realistic assessment side of this discussion," Steele announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose shooting credentials were beyond question. "Single shot, 1,000 yards, standard precision target, witnessed by range officials. Are we shooting for bragging rights, or did you have something more substantial in mind?" Victoria considered the question while she opened her worn ammunition box, revealing cartridges that looked like they'd been hand-loaded during the Carter administration. The brass cases showed the kind of honest wear that came from multiple reloadings, and the bullets themselves appeared to be simple designs rather than the sophisticated match-grade projectiles that filled Steele's precision-loaded magazines. "I was thinking more along the lines of professional respect," Victoria said quietly, her words carrying implications that would soon transform the entire dynamic at Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility. "Though I suspect the outcome might settle more than just questions about equipment capabilities." The formal challenge had been accepted, parameters established, and witnesses gathered. What remained was the execution of a contest that would either confirm every skeptical assessment voiced throughout the day or deliver a lesson in humility that would reshape the careers and attitudes of every elite marksman present. Victoria's ancient Winchester was about to speak with a voice that would silence every critic and skeptic within range of its message, though none of the confident experts surrounding her position had any suspicion of the education they were about to receive. The assembled crowd at Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility fell into an expectant silence as Captain Mitchell Steele approached the 1,000-yard firing line with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a shooting competition that mattered. His custom rifle system gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, every component representing years of research, development, and precision manufacturing that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible in portable weapons technology. Steele's shooting position was a masterclass in modern tactical methodology. His advanced bipod system automatically adjusted for cant and provided vibration, dampening that eliminated external influences on his rifle's stability. The ballistic computer mounted to his weapon had already calculated the precise shooting solution based on real-time atmospheric data, wind speed measurements, temperature gradients, and even the microscopic effects of barometric pressure on bullet trajectory at extreme distance. The target at 1,000 yards was barely visible through the heat shimmer rising from the superheated Colorado range, appearing as little more than a distant speck that wavered and danced in the afternoon atmospheric distortion. Even through high-powered spotting scopes, the black bullseye seemed to fade in and out of focus, challenging the visual systems of observers who understood that hitting such a target required precision, measured in fractions of inches. Steele settled behind his rifle with movements that demonstrated thousands of hours of competitive experience and advanced training. His shooting jacket was precisely adjusted to provide consistent support, his cheek weld positioned with mechanical accuracy, and his breathing pattern settled into the controlled rhythm that serious marksmen use to manage physiological variables that could affect shot placement at extreme distances. The shot, when it came, was executed with textbook perfection. Steele's rifle system delivered its precision-loaded cartridge with a sharp crack that echoed across the range, the sound rolling through the Colorado mountains like distant thunder. His follow-through was flawless, maintaining sight picture long enough to observe bullet impact before beginning to relax his shooting position. Through the electronic scoring system's high-powered optics, range officials could immediately see Steele's bullet impact clearly marked in the target's scoring rings. The shot was exceptional by any standard, less than 2 inches from the exact center of the bullseye, well within the precision requirements that defined elite-level marksmanship. The assembled crowd of elite marksmen responded with appreciative murmurs and nodding approval, recognizing the kind of performance they expected from one of their primer shooters. Master Sergeant Kevin Walsh's voice carried across the range with professional authority as he announced the official measurement, 2.3 inches from center. "Excellent shot, Captain Steele. That's going to be extremely difficult to improve upon." The crowd's attention turned toward Victoria as she rose from her cross-legged position and approached the firing line with fluid grace that seemed incongruous with her earlier poor performance. There was something different in her demeanor now, a subtle transformation that made several observers shift uncomfortably as they watched her settle behind her ancient Winchester without the elaborate adjustment rituals that characterized modern precision shooting. Victoria's shooting position was deceptively simple, suggesting someone who had learned to achieve stability through technique rather than equipment-dependent methods. The Winchester's worn stock settled against her shoulder like it belonged there, and her eye found the scope's sight picture with unconscious ease that spoke of countless hours of practice across more ranges than most shooters would visit in a lifetime. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The woman who had appeared uncertain and out of place throughout the morning suddenly radiated a quiet confidence that made the elite marksman watching from behind the firing line exchange Uncertain glances. Victoria's breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that serious shooters use to manage heart rate and muscle tension, and her body assumed the kind of perfect stillness that came from decades of disciplined practice. What happened next defied every principle of ballistic science and equipment performance that the assembled experts thought they understood. Victoria's breathing settled into a pattern that seemed to synchronize with the natural rhythm of the afternoon wind patterns, and her trigger finger found the familiar curve of the Winchester's trigger, a component that had been adjusted by a master gunsmith sometime during an era when precision was achieved through craftsmanship rather than computer modeling. The ancient rifle scope picture, despite its obvious limitations and scratched glass, somehow provided Victoria with information that her competitors' advanced optics had missed. Through years of experience with this particular piece of equipment, she had learned to read environmental conditions and atmospheric effects in ways that transcended technological assistance, understanding the relationship between her rifle and external variables through intuition, developed over thousands of rounds fired under every conceivable condition. The trigger broke with the kind of clean release that modern manufacturing techniques struggled to replicate despite advances in metallurgy and precision machining. The Winchester recoiled straight back into Victoria's shoulder with no muzzle jump or lateral movement, the rifle tracking perfectly in line with her target as if guided by forces that operated beyond mechanical physics. The sound of the cartridges detonation seemed somehow different from Steele's shot moments, earlier, deeper, more authoritative, carrying a resonance that spoke of larger powder charges and heavier bullets traveling at velocities that modern precision ammunition couldn't match. The report rolled across the range with an almost musical quality that made several experienced shooters pause and listen with expressions of puzzled recognition. Through the spotting scopes and electronic scoring systems, the impact was visible immediately, creating a moment of stunned silence that lasted several heartbeats longer than normal range protocol. Victoria's bullet hadn't just hit the center of the bullseye. It had obliterated it with surgical precision that defied belief, creating a hole so perfectly centered that the scoring officials had to examine their equipment twice to confirm what they were seeing. The shot hadn't merely found the center. It had redefined it, leaving a ragged opening that would have been impossible to improve upon, even with unlimited additional attempts using the most advanced equipment available. The mathematical precision of the bullet placement suggested capabilities that existed beyond the realm of normal human achievement, as if Victoria's ancient Winchester had somehow violated the laws of physics that governed ballistic performance. Master Sergeant Walsh's voice, when he finally found it, carried a tone of professional amazement that betrayed his 26 years of experience managing elite shooting competitions. Dead center. Perfect score. Absolute bullseye. His announcement was matter-of-fact, but the implications reverberated through the assembled crowd like shock waves from an unexpected explosion. The silence that followed stretched across Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility like a physical presence, broken only by the distant sound of wind moving through the Colorado pines and the quiet, mechanical hum of electronic scoring equipment processing data that challenged every assumption the observers had held about precision shooting, equipment capabilities, and the relationship between technological advancement and true marksmanship mastery. Victoria's impossible achievement had just rewritten the record books and shattered the confidence of every elite marksman present, proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are those who appear least threatening, and that true mastery transcends equipment limitations in ways that defy rational explanation. The ancient Winchester had delivered its message with absolute authority, silencing every critic and skeptic within range of its devastating precision. The stunned silence that had settled over Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility was shattered by the urgent electronic chirping of Master Sergeant Walsh's secure communication device. The encrypted call came through channels that required immediate attention, and Walsh found himself speaking in hushed, urgent tones with personnel whose voices carried the weight of authority that transcended normal military hierarchy. "Colonel." Rebecca Harrison's voice crackled through the secure line, with information that would transform everyone's understanding of what they had just witnessed. "Master Sergeant Walsh," she said, her tone carrying the kind of gravity that made 30-year veterans snap to attention. "I'm transmitting classified documentation that will clarify the situation on your range. The information I'm about to share requires immediate implementation of security protocols." Walsh stepped away from the firing line for privacy, but his expression during the conversation was visible to the elite marksmen who watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition of something that challenged every assumption they had made about Victoria Ashford. When he returned to the assembled crowd, his demeanor toward Victoria had undergone a transformation so complete that several observers immediately understood they were dealing with someone whose background transcended normal military categories. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walsh announced, his voice carrying the weight of official authority backed by information that came from levels of command few personnel ever encountered. "I need to inform you that Victoria Ashford is not the civilian competitor we assumed her to be. She is Master Gunnery Sergeant Victoria Ashford, United States Marine Corps, retired, recipient of the Navy Cross, Distinguished Service Cross, and Silver Star for actions that remain classified at the highest levels of government." The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow, sending ripples of shock through elite marksmen who had spent the entire day mocking someone whose service record included decorations that most Marines could only dream of earning. Captain Mitchell Steele felt his custom rifle suddenly seem inadequate in ways that had nothing to do with technology or precision manufacturing, as he realized he had been challenging a living legend whose achievements existed at the pinnacle of military marksmanship. Walsh continued reading from the classified documentation that had just arrived. Through secure channels, his voice growing more respectful with each line of Victoria's extraordinary service record. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford holds the record for the longest confirmed sniper elimination in United States military history, achieved during classified operations in mountainous terrain under conditions that required her to make precision shots at distances exceeding 2,400 meters using equipment similar to what she demonstrated today." Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan found himself facing a complete recalibration of his understanding of capability, achievement, and the relationship between equipment and expertise. His extensive military experience had never prepared him for encountering someone whose actual qualifications made his own considerable accomplishments seem elementary by comparison. The woman he had suggested should withdraw from competition had been operating at levels of skill that placed her beyond anything he could aspire to reach. Furthermore, Walsh continued, consulting the documentation with obvious reverence, Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford served as the primary marksmanship instructor for classified special operations, units whose existence is not acknowledged through normal channels. Her training methods and tactical innovations have been incorporated into sniper doctrine used by elite units across multiple branches of the armed forces. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves stood frozen beside his expensive custom rifle system, trying to process the cognitive dissonance between the morning's mockery and the reality of Victoria's true identity. His equipment, which had represented the pinnacle of civilian and military technology, suddenly felt like an amateur's attempt to compensate for limitations that Victoria had overcome through pure skill and decades of experience in environments where technological solutions weren't available or reliable. The electronic scoring system that had documented Victoria's perfect shot now took on entirely different significance as the assembled marksmen understood they had witnessed not a lucky accident, but a controlled demonstration of capabilities that existed far beyond the scope of normal competitive shooting. Victoria's ancient Winchester hadn't defied the laws of physics. It had been wielded by someone whose understanding of ballistics, environmental conditions, and precision shooting transcended the technological assistance that her competitors relied upon. Corporal Jake Morrison found himself reassessing every interaction he had witnessed throughout the day, searching for clues he had missed about Victoria's true capabilities and background. The casual dismissal and barely concealed mockery that had characterized the morning's attitudes now seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially career-damaging, given that Victoria's authorization had clearly come from command levels that didn't typically involve themselves in routine training operations. Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford's presence at this facility, Walsh announced, reading from additional documentation that continued to arrive through secure channels, represents a classified evaluation of current training methodologies and equipment dependencies that may be compromising the fundamental skills required for precision shooting under adverse conditions. The implications of Walsh's statement began to sink in among the elite marksmen who realized they had been unwitting participants in an assessment that would likely influence training doctrine and equipment procurement decisions at the highest levels of military command. Victoria's demonstration hadn't been about proving her own capabilities. It had been about evaluating theirs and identifying potential weaknesses in approaches that prioritized technological solutions over fundamental marksmanship skills. Captain Alexandra Torres experienced a complex mixture of professional embarrassment and grudging admiration as she understood that Victoria's morning performance had been a carefully orchestrated deception designed to assess how elite military marksmen would react to someone who appeared to challenge their technological superiority. The poor scores and apparent incompetence had been deliberate misdirection that allowed Victoria to observe their attitudes, methods, and assumptions without revealing her true identity. Sergeant Major Frank D'Angelo's attempts to research Victoria's background through normal military databases now made perfect sense. Her service record existed in classified systems that weren't accessible to personnel without special compartmented information clearances. The absence of documentation in standard marksmanship databases hadn't indicated amateur status. It had reflected the sensitive nature of operations and programs that governments preferred not to acknowledge publicly. The Winchester Rifle Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford demonstrated today, Walsh continued, represents equipment specifications and modifications developed through classified research programs that tested the limits of precision shooting under conditions where electronic systems and advanced optics might be compromised or unavailable. Her shot wasn't just accurate, it validated training methodologies and equipment capabilities that exist outside normal military procurement channels. Victoria's response to the revelation of her background was characteristically understated, continuing to organize her equipment with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout the day. The records Master Sergeant Walsh mentioned represent team efforts across multiple operations, she said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of pride or satisfaction, despite the dramatic transformation in how she was being perceived. Individual achievements in special operations are usually the result of exceptional support from people whose contributions don't appear in official documentation. My role was simply to execute shots that mission requirements demanded, using whatever equipment and methods were available under the circumstances. Her attempt to deflect credit only enhanced the respect that was beginning to replace the morning's mockery among elite marksmen, who were finally understanding the magnitude of their misjudgment. Victoria's gracious response to hours of disrespectful treatment demonstrated a level of professionalism that distinguished truly exceptional people from merely skilled ones, proving that her mastery extended beyond technical capability into the realm of character and leadership that defined genuine military excellence. The transformation at Fort Thunderridge's advanced tactical facility was immediate and profound, as if someone had suddenly reversed the polarity of every relationship. and assumption that had governed the day's interactions. Elite marksmen who had spent hours mocking Victoria's equipment and capabilities now found themselves approaching her position with the kind of reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients or commanders whose tactical brilliance had saved entire units from destruction. Captain Mitchell Steele was the first to step forward, his face reflecting the kind of genuine remorse that comes from recognizing a profound failure of judgment that would haunt him for years. His expensive custom rifle, which had represented the pinnacle of technological achievement just minutes earlier, now seemed like an amateur's attempt to compensate for skills he was only beginning to understand he lacked. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford," Steele said formally, his voice carrying the weight of professional embarrassment mixed with sincere respect, "I owe you the most profound apology. My comments throughout the day were completely inappropriate and demonstrated a level of ignorance about true marksmanship that I'm deeply ashamed of. I had no right to question your presence here or your capabilities." Victoria's response demonstrated the kind of grace under pressure that distinguished exceptional leaders from merely skilled practitioners. She looked up from securing her rifle with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the day's challenges, showing no trace of vindication or satisfaction despite having just delivered one of the most devastating demonstrations of superior ability in military marksmanship. "History. No apology necessary, Captain," Victoria replied quietly, her tone carrying the same conversational quality that had characterized all her interactions despite the dramatic reversal in power dynamics. "Your assessment was based on reasonable observations and logical assumptions. Most people using equipment like this wouldn't be capable of competitive performance at elite levels. Your skepticism was entirely justified given the information available to you." Her gracious response to hours of disrespectful treatment only deepened the sense of shame that was spreading through the assembled elite marksmen who understood they had witnessed not just superior marksmanship, but a masterclass in leadership, humility, and professional conduct under adverse conditions. Lieutenant Colonel James Brennan approached Victoria's position with the bearing of someone seeking forgiveness for conduct that had violated every principle of military courtesy and respect for distinguished service. His extensive command experience had taught him to recognize exceptional personnel, yet he had completely failed to identify someone whose achievements placed her among the most elite practitioners in military history. "Master Gunnery Sergeant," Brennan said, his voice reflecting both professional embarrassment and genuine admiration, "I've spent my entire career studying tactical excellence, and I completely failed to recognize it when it was standing right in front of me. Your demonstration today has taught me more about the fundamentals of precision shooting than years of advanced training programs." Victoria nodded acknowledgement while continuing her methodical equipment organization, neither pleased by the validation nor resentful about the morning's treatment. "Modern training programs provide excellent technical foundations, Colonel. The computational methods and equipment capabilities available today represent remarkable advances over what previous generations had access to. Sometimes older approaches can complement newer methodologies rather than competing with them." Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves found himself facing a complete reconstruction of his understanding of capability, equipment, and the relationship between technological advancement and fundamental skill. His custom rifle system, which had cost him 3 years of savings and represented everything he thought he knew about precision shooting, suddenly seemed like an expensive collection of components that masked his lack of genuine expertise. "Master Gunnery Sergeant," Reeves said, his voice barely concealing the emotional impact of realizing how thoroughly his assumptions had been demolished, "could I possibly observe your training methods? I've been approaching precision shooting completely wrong, and I'd be honored to learn from someone who actually understands what marksmanship means at the highest levels." The techniques Victoria had shared for reading environmental conditions without electronic assistance had proven invaluable for operations in regions where atmospheric monitoring equipment might malfunction, or where electromagnetic interference could compromise digital systems. Special operations units reported significant improvements in mission success rates after implementing her observational methods and manual calculation techniques. Sergeant Major Frank D'Angelo, whose assessment abilities had been so thoroughly recalibrated by his encounter with Victoria, had developed new evaluation protocols that focused on fundamental competence rather than equipment familiarity. His innovations had been adopted across multiple training facilities, reducing the number of capable personnel who might be overlooked due to unconventional backgrounds or approaches. Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford taught us that capability can't be judged by appearance, equipment, or conformity to expected patterns. D'Angelo explained to a group of senior non-commissioned officers responsible for talent identification and development. Some of our most effective personnel have been individuals who didn't fit standard molds, but possessed fundamental skills that transcended technological dependence. The Winchester rifle itself had become something of a legend within military marksmanship circles, inspiring numerous personnel to explore older shooting techniques and equipment that had been largely abandoned in favor of modern technological solutions. Several elite units had begun incorporating vintage equipment training into their programs, recognizing that understanding fundamental principles could provide advantages when advanced systems were unavailable or compromised. Victoria's influence had extended into civilian marksmanship communities as well, where her demonstration had sparked renewed interest in traditional shooting techniques and equipment-independent skills. Competitive shooting organizations had established new categories that emphasized fundamental ability over technological advancement, creating opportunities for shooters who possessed skill but lacked access to expensive equipment. The annual Ashford Excellence in Marksmanship Award had become one of the military's most prestigious recognitions, celebrating personnel who demonstrated exceptional skill through unconventional methods or who overcame significant equipment disadvantages. Through pure talent and determination, recipients were selected not just for their shooting ability, but for their embodiment of the principles Victoria had demonstrated: humility, perseverance, and the understanding that true mastery transcended technological dependence. Master Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, whose technical expertise had been expanded by Victoria's instruction in fundamental techniques, had authored the definitive military manual on equipment-independent marksmanship that was now required reading at sniper schools worldwide. The principles Master Gunnery Sergeant Ashford shared represent knowledge that was nearly lost to technological advancement. Mendoza wrote in his introduction, "Her demonstration reminded us that the most sophisticated equipment is only as effective as the fundamental skills of the person operating it." The story of Victoria's perfect shot had entered military folklore, told and retold in training environments as an example of the importance of recognizing excellence, regardless of how it was packaged. New personnel learned about the danger of judging capability by appearance and the value of maintaining humble attitudes when evaluating others' potential contributions to mission success. Victoria herself had returned to her quiet civilian life, but not before establishing scholarship programs that provided advanced marksmanship training to personnel who showed promise but lacked access to expensive equipment or traditional training opportunities. Her legacy lived on not just in changed training doctrine and improved capability, but in a fundamental transformation of how military professionals approach the evaluation of talent and the recognition of excellence in all its forms. The ancient Winchester remained in its place of honor, a permanent reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the newest or most expensive, but those wielded by people who understand that true strength comes from within, and that mastery is measured not by the sophistication of one's tools, but by the depth of one's knowledge, the steadiness of one's character, and the willingness to share hard-earned wisdom with those who have the humility to learn. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If This one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.